Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening episode of Pursue. And today we have Pursue 6Q, which is liver and GI pathology, and we are streaming live from Al Sabah Hospital, Kuwait City, via Kolkata. And today we have a very special person. We have Dr. Kaushik Majumdar, who is a postgraduate from PGI Chandigarh, a DNB MNA MS, a specialist pathologist. He has about 17 years of experience in diagnostic pathology and postgraduate teaching. He was earlier associated with GB Pant Institute of Postgraduate Medical Education and Research, and he has got interest in neuropathology, GI pathology, hepatobiliary pathology. He's also a DIPF FRC path, and today he shall be talking on a very important topic, which is inflammatory bowel disease. Before I ask him to start the lecture, let me request all of you to please keep your mic muted, your camera off, and please don't share your screen. With this, let me request Dr. Kaushik Majumdar, sir, please share your screen and start your presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Nadeem sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Just press present now. You can press present now, your entire screen. And then press in the center of the screen and then press share. Yeah, you can even open your camera so that we can see you simultaneously. Yeah, please make it full screen.
Yes. So, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Dr. Nadeem, for such a kind introduction. So, can you hear me?
Very clearly. Please go ahead. Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. So today I will be covering on inflammatory bowel disease. It is not only an important topic, it is a vast topic, and it is an ever-changing topic with newer concepts gradually developing every time. So we all are to some extent familiar with these entities, but since every time the concepts change, newer concepts come into the practice, the older concepts are becoming obsolete. So I thought to cover certain newer dimensions of this particular entity in addition to what we practice every day. So thank you all for your kind attention and presence. So my honest gratitude to PGIMER Chandigarh and GB Pant Institute of Postgraduate Medical Education and Research, from where these two institutes I have acquired majority of my training, and these two institutes have helped me to reach where I am today. So sincere gratitude. So I start with a clinical perspective. So the clinicians at the beginning, when they work up a patient, they try to work up on the basis of small bowel diarrhea, large bowel diarrhea. So when we interacted with the clinicians while we were dealing with the GI pathology services, they actually have given us this kind of feedback how they work up. So small bowel diarrhea, generally it is voluminous, generally watery. Regarding watery, there is an exception. Yes, a large bowel diarrhea which is watery is microscopic colitis. Other than that, small bowel diarrhea is watery. Small bowel diarrhea tends to be greasy because of the steatorrhea and malabsorption, and for the same reason, small bowel diarrhea presents often with weight loss. It may have vomiting, and if blood is present, it is altered blood. On the other hand, large bowel diarrhea, what we will be dealing with now in IBD, or rather it should be called large bowel altered bowel habits. So there will be mucus, more frequency. So large bowel diarrhea usually presents with frequency. Tenesmus, the clinicians give importance to this clinical symptom very much. Tenesmus, they say it is one of the surest sign of large bowel diarrhea. And what it is a painful, urgent urge to defecate, but when the person actually reaches to the washroom for defecation, no effective stool can be passed, or a very small amount of stool mixed with blood is passed. And this happens multiple times of the day with the symptoms of painful emergency urge to defecate. And this is a very debilitating and disturbing symptom of large bowel diarrhea, and it is one of the surest symptoms of large bowel diarrhea, which the clinicians give a lot of importance and urgency. And if there is blood in stool, it will be fresh blood or hematochezia. So these are some differences of approach in large bowel diarrhea and small bowel diarrhea. Our histological recapitulation: the features of ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, most of them are characteristic, but often it becomes impossible to distinguish between the two entities, especially after treatment. And so far as the normal histology is concerned, the lamina propria is usually more busy and cellular in the right colon, with increased number of plasma cells, lymphocytes, and eosinophils. We have to be aware of some artifacts like lamina propria edema may be related to some bowel preparation, and there could be some pseudo air spaces due to air insufflation during endoscopy. So very important to distinguish between acute versus chronic colitis. So few important features which we need to discuss is crypt architecture distorted in chronic colitis. So features of chronicity: expansion of lamina propria. Usually acute colitis is a superficial phenomenon. Chronic colitis is a pan phenomenon. It is superficial and deep. And deep is very important in this regard. Why? Because basal lymphoid aggregates, basal lymphoplasmacytosis, these are very important histological features of chronic colitis. So cryptitis, cryptapses can be present in both. Again, pyloric or Paneth cell metaplasia is a feature of chronic colitis. So the term, we have to be careful. Paneth cell metaplasia means presence of Paneth cell where it should not be there, that is beyond the mid transverse colon, below down. If we see Paneth cells, it is a feature of chronicity, it is Paneth cell metaplasia. On the other hand, places where Paneth cell should be there, that is the proximal large bowel, small bowel, if we see Paneth cell hyperplasia there, that is again a feature of chronicity. So Paneth cell hyperplasia in place where Paneth cell should be there is a feature of chronicity. Paneth cell metaplasia where it should not be there, it is also a feature of chronicity. And lamina propria fibrosis is also can be present in chronic colitis. So we have to remember plasma cells in sheets between the bases of the crypts and muscularis. Basal plasmacytosis is one of the excellent histological marker of chronic colitis. So coming to chronic active colitis. So as we have discussed about the Paneth cells, what is active injury? Neutrophil or eosinophil mediated epithelial injury in the form of cryptitis, cryptapses, mucosal erosions, ulceration, and epithelial degenerative changes. So when active injury is superimposed, is a chronic active colitis, which we often report in while dealing cases with inflammatory bowel disease. So coming to ulcerative colitis, adolescents and young with a second peak in the middle aged, more common in the industrialized countries compared to less developed countries, more in urban compared to rural populations. There are genomics, IBD2 locus on chromosome 12, C3435T polymorphism, MDR1 gene has been reported, increased frequency of HLA A11, A7, and HLA DR1 has been associated with severe colitis. Etiopathogenesis, very important. Few etiopathogenesis and immunological aspects of ulcerative colitis we must be aware of. So there is a protective bacterial flora in our gut, and there is a protective biofilm which is harboring this protective microbiota. So alteration of the balance between this protective flora and the harmful bacteria like Bacteroidetes triggers the IBD, and reduce concentration of short-chain fatty acids which provide nutrition to the colonocytes. The impaired mucosal barrier causes inability to kill microbes, impaired host defense mechanisms, hyper-responsiveness, and production of high level of inflammatory cytokines, causes tissue damage, and abnormal antigen processing, loss of tolerance, autoimmunity, abnormally excessive T cell response all may contribute. So the pattern recognition receptors, TLRs and NNRs, the nod-like receptors and tone-like receptors, they activate the downstream NF-kappa B, leading to the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines and chemokines. So defect in any of these pathways can result in abnormal bacterial processing and possibly IBD. So an immunological milieu to demonstrate, these are the tight junctions, these are the bacterial flora. So these are the tight junctions, these are the bacterial flora. So loss of tight junctions, here the tight junctions are maintained, here is the loss. So loss of tight junctions is the one of the earliest trigger for ulcerative colitis, allowing entry of the microbes. Not only that, the dendritic cells get exposed to their toll-like receptors, the dendritic cells get activated, and the bacteria which enters activates the macrophage. Through NF-kappa B, what we have discussed, the chemokines, the cytokines are liberated, which further activates the dendritic cells, and they present the antigen. So Th2 pathway through CD4 mediated, it is activated, liberating IL-4 and IL-13, which causes further epithelial damage and tight junction damage and increased permeability. On the other hand, the receptors in the endothelium, they bind to the integrin receptors of the circulating lymphocytes, and through that they allow entry of the gut-specific lymphocytes. And there are certain chemokines which recruits the neutrophils and other leukocytes into the lamina propria, propagating the inflammatory milieu. So this is how ulcerative colitis or IBD1 starts. It keeps on propagating until and unless if any of the pathways are interfered through immunomodulatory agents. So the diagnosis is a three-tier clinical, endoscopy and histological correlation. A single parameter cannot diagnose IBD, as we are aware. So clinical features, as we were discussing, urgency.
Sorry to just bother you, sir. Can you just press that height and just remove that pop-up so that it's obscuring some of your presentation. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Sorry for
rest everything okay?
Perfectly
everything okay? Can you hear properly?
Absolutely clear. No issues. Thank you. Okay. Please carry on.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nadeem. Thank you so much. So the clinical features: urgency, passage of blood and mucus, tenesmus, abdominal pain, fever, and weight loss. The extracolonic manifestations, as we have learned earlier, the erythema nodosum, pyoderma gangrenosum, sweet syndromes, aphthous ulcers, episcleritis, uveitis, and seronegative quasi-articular and polyarticular arthropathy. So extracolonic manifestations, primary sclerosing cholangitis, we have to be clear about this. If primary sclerosing cholangitis is associated with IBD or ulcerative colitis, it follows an independent progressive course even when the ulcerative colitis has been stable for years. So PSC follows its own course. Clubbing of fingernails, usually in long-standing ulcerative colitis, peripheral edema. Serology, the perinuclear anti-neutrophil cytoplasmic antibodies, PANCA, are positive in 60 to 80% of the patients. IgA, anti-Saccharomyces cerevisiae antibody, ASCA, in less number of patients. IgG ASCA is seen in around 20% of the patients. Radiology, radiological approach is important. Double contrast barium enema is the earliest stage ulcerative colitis, giving the prime granular appearance. Advanced disease with deep submucosal ulcers gives the collar button ulcers, and pancolitis, diffuse absence of mucosal frustrations, impending and narrowing and shortening of the colon. Advanced ulcerative colitis, hallmark is mural thickening. CT with contrast, classic target or double halo sign caused by inhomogeneous enhancement of the thickened bowel wall. Rectal narrowing, and as a result of the rectal narrowing, there is widening of the presacral space. So this is the double contrast barium enema, which is one of the earliest signs of ulcerative colitis, giving the granular mucosa of the colon. And this is the CT image. We can see that the thickened bowel loop. We can see the thickened bowel loop. So Mayo endoscopic score for ulcerative colitis, the normal endoscopic appearance, we can see here the vascular pattern. So a little bit of we pathologists have to be aware of what is normal and what is abnormal endoscopy. So this normal vascular pattern, in many times in the while reporting the inflammatory bowel disease biopsies, we see the gastroenterologist write loss of vascular patterns. So what is that? It is a normal vascular pattern is like this. This is the diminished vascular pattern. This is loss of vascular patterns, and this is frank ulceration. So this is score 0, score 1, score 2, and score 3 is the Mayo endoscopic score with normal, mild, with a moderate, with the erythema, and lastly it is the severe with ulceration. So Montreal classification of extent and severity. So E1 is the proctitis, E2 is the left-sided distal involvement limited to the splenic flexure, and pancolitis where the extension is beyond the splenic flexure. And regarding the stool frequency, it is the severity, how much the debilitated the patient is. Gross features classically involves the rectum with variable but continuous involvement, ulcerative proctitis limited to the rectum as we have discussed, left-sided or distal is distal to the splenic flexure, and extensive of pancolitis is proximal to the splenic flexure involvement. And skip lesions may happen in ulcerative colitis not only in Crohn's, it can have appendiceal, periappendiceal or ascending colon involvement also. So mucosa is diffusely congested, granular, edematous. Very important, we have to take a note of this. Ulcers usually small and oriented longitudinally in relation to the tinea coli. In Crohn's, the ulcers are oriented horizontally or parted. They are ulcers, they are like a cutting edge of the knife. We will discuss later. So ulcerative colitis, ulcerative to tinea coli. Ulcers undermine adjacent edges of mucosa, formation of polypoid mucosal folds. That's why it is the pseudopolyps that actually filiform. So this three-tier correlation, what we have mentioned, the clinical features, the endoscopic features, and the pathological features taken together, we arrive at the diagnosis of ulcerative colitis. So histology for sign out, what we should use is with radiological, clinical, endoscopic correlation, what we use is chronic inactive colitis, chronic active colitis, and active colitis. With our report, clinical, radiological, endoscopic correlation, and the diagnosis or remission is decided. So chronic inactive colitis, chronic active colitis, and active colitis. So degree of activity can be mild, moderate, severe. Mild when less than 50% of the mucosa shows activity, moderate when more than 50% of the mucosa shows activity, and severe when surface erosion or ulceration is present. So features of chronicity and features of activity. We have read it time and again, but we will have to remember it very, very well. So this is very important from the diagnostic point of view. As we were aware, features of chronicity: crypt architectural distortion, crypt atrophy, shortening, foreshortening. There is a gap which is created, irregular spacing of crypts, irregular size, crypt branching, budding, loss of parallelism, and filiform surface contour. So basal plasmacytosis, as we have discussed, one of the very characteristic feature of chronicity, basal lymphoid aggregates, diffuse mixed lymphoplasmacytic infiltrate within the lamina, Panetz metaplasia in left colon, hyperplasia in the right colon, pyloric gland metaplasia, lamina propria or submucosal fibrosis, and thickening or duplication of the muscularis. So here we can see that the crypt loss and there is basal lymphoplasmacytosis. In this photomicrograph, the neutrophilic or eosinophilic cryptitis, cryptapsis, necrosis, these are the features of activity, regenerative and degenerative epithelial changes, erosions, and ulcers. So these are the basal lymphoplasmacytosis, crypt loss, crypt irregularity, there's a Panetz cell metaplasia, and this is the pseudopolyp. And here we can appreciate the cryptitis with eosinophil rich infiltrate and multiple cryptacises with basal lymphoplasmacytosis. So regenerative changes, loss of mucin, enlarged and variably sized nuclei with or without nuclear stratification, hyperchromasia, prominent nucleoli, increased mitotic activity can be seen. There can be increased apoptotic activity in the crypts, adjacent to erosions and ulcers. There can be syncytial appearance with abundant eosinophilic cytoplasm, the regenerative changes. So the histological index, many histological indices have been discussed. Among them, the most validated one are the simplified 2017 and Nancy index of 2017. Among them, the Nancy is the chronic, no histologic significant disease or mild increase in chronic inflammatory cells. Grade 1, chronic inflammatory infiltrate, some determining response to therapy. So special entities, neuroendocrine cell hyperplasia, follicular proctitis, it has a less favorable response to medical therapy when present. Backwash ileitis, important, severe pancolitis with involvement of the cecum and ileocecal valve, chronic active inflammation in the distal terminal ileum, and patchy villi inflammation induced incompetence of the ileocecal valve and subsequent reflux of the colonic contents back to the terminal ileum. That's why the term backwash ileitis. So when backwash ileitis is present, when to suspect Crohn's disease? So one has to be careful when somebody is saying ileitis in IBD. So it may be Crohn's. So when greater length of the ileum is involved, more than 5 centimeters, it may not be backwash, it may be due to Crohn's. If crypt architectural distortion, fissuring, ulceration, and submucosal inflammation and granulomas are present in the same location, it may not be backwash, it is due to Crohn's. Suppose there is no severe disease up to the proximal cecum or ileocecal valve, the distal large gut is uninvolved, it may be due to Crohn's. It may not be backwash, it may be due to Crohn's. On the other hand, in ulcerative colitis, suppose there is ileitis without involvement of the cecum, then it is not backwash ileitis. It is called non-backwash ileitis without involvement of the cecum. Ulcerative colitis, ileitis can happen. In that case, we call it non-backwash ileitis. Toxic megacolon, severe attack of colitis, acute colonic dilatation, transverse diameter more than 6, loss of ostration, bowel wall appears thin, dilated, congested, serosal surface with fibrinous or fibrinopurulent exudate, mucosa denudate, hemorrhagic, ulcerated with purulent exudates and rarely perforation. So it is a surgical emergency. So treatment of ulcerative colitis outline, treat the active disease by induction therapy and prevent recurrence of disease after remission by the maintenance therapy. And Stricture in ulcerative colitis happens in 5% of patients. Suspicion for malignancy if the stricture is present proximal to the splenic flexure. Crohn's colitis. So Crohn's disease is a chronic inflammatory condition that can affect small and proximal large intestine with the maximum propensity. Crohn's colitis can also happen like an exclusive involvement of the colon. Isolated colonic Crohn's and diagnosis to surgery. So generally, Crohn's in the colon is not good. It happens at an older age, and the shorter interval, it causes a rapid progression, so it requires early surgery. So it's the revised Montreal classification based on age and disease onset, principal anatomic location, and clinical behavior for the Crohn's disease. Colonic, L3 is ileocolonic. Suppose upper GI is also maybe involved in Crohn's, stomach, duodenum. So in addition to L1, then if upper GI is involved, we can say L1, L4, L2, L4, L3, L4. So L4 is added if upper GI is involved. And the behavior, stricturing, non-stricturing, non-penetrating, or stricturing or penetrating. So clinical features, women are slightly more commonly affected in the 2nd to 4th decades of life. Diarrhea may be bloody or non-bloody. Intermittent and colicky abdominal pain. There can be perianal skin tags. Crohn's disease can have serious catastrophes like fissures, deep ulcers, and these fissures and deep ulcers can lead to debilitating fistulas. And then debilitating fistulas can communicate with the bladder, can communicate with the urogenital tract from the vagina, and it can even communicate with the upper GI with feculent vomiting. So chlamydia, listeria, pseudomonas, paramyxovirus, mycobacterium paratuberculosis have been etiologically linked to Crohn's. Disease pattern, as mentioned, fistulizing disease is extremely debilitating and aggressive, fibrostenosing disease and cyclotrinzing disease. So extra-intestinal manifestations, quasi-articular arthropathy, polyarticular as mentioned, peripheral aphalgias, aeroderma gangrenosum, erythema nodosum, oral aphthous as discussed earlier. Primary sclerosing cholangitis may develop in 4% of patients with colonic involvement in Crohn's. Serology, elevated ASCA levels. Imaging, enhancement and increased density of the pericolonic fat, central involvement in the early stage. Etiopathogenesis, the NOD1, CARD1 or the NOD2, CARD15 gene and variants in autophagy related genes has been reported. Transforming growth factor beta has an important role because it is a fibrosing disease, causes mural fibrosis, causing the immunological dysfunction in Crohn's. Associated with higher socioeconomic status, oral contraceptives, NSAIDs, refined sugars in the diet, and decreased dietary fiber. So this is a small bowel follow through. We can see a stricture and we can see the accumulation of the contrast proximal to the stricture. On the other hand, we can see here there is a stricture and the wall thickening. So this is a magnetic resonance enterography showing the thickened wall of the sigmoid colon and the luminal stricture. So gross and histology, segmental involvement, sometimes pancolitis can happen. Serosa congested with a fibrinous exudate, fat wrapping or the creeping fat as discussed along the anteromesenteric border, indicator of transmural disease. Mucosal aphthous ulcers overlying lymphoid aggregates, ulcers enlarged to form discontinuous serpiginous or pure claw longitudinal furrows giving rise to the cobblestone appearance. Mild neutrophilic infiltrate in the superficial half of the lymphoid aggregate, and neutrophils infiltrate the crypts and form basilar crypt abscess, epithelial necrosis, and intraluminal aggregate. This happens in the aphthous ulcers. So this is the Ross photograph of the proximal dilatation, and this is the stricture. And here is a duodenal involvement with the loss of villus pattern, and there is some lymphoplasmacytic infiltrate excess, and we can see the Paneth cell hyperplasia. And here is an aphthous ulcer in the ileum where there is blunted villi. We can see the neutrophilic infiltrate in the surface overlying a lymphoid follicle. So pathologic features of Crohn's. Major pathologic features: segmental disease, creeping fat, fistulas and sinuses, skip lesions, granulomas, transmural lymphoid aggregates, aphthous and fissuring ulcers. Minor or secondary pathologic changes: submucosal fibrosis, neural hypertrophy, muscularis mucosae hypertrophy, muscularis propria hypertrophy, neural plexitis, perivascular lymphoid aggregates, serositis and pyloric gland metaplasia are the minor changes. So very important, the granulomas, especially in the tropical countries, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, TB, or infective or Yersinia granulomas. How to differentiate between ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, and tubercular granulomas? Ulcerative colitis granuloma Z-pression, they are crypt-related granulomas. Granulomas as a result of the crypt rupture and reaction to the crypt contents. Reaction to the extravasation of the crypt contents. On the other hand, Crohn's disease are generally pericryptal microgranulomas, and as we all know, tubercular granulomas are necrotizing epithelioid cell granulomas, and Yersinia has a stellate granuloma with neutrophil-rich abscess. So ulcerative colitis granulomas are located basally in the mucosa. Crohn's granulomas may have a random distribution in the mucosa and even superficial mucosa. Tubercular granulomas may also have a random distribution. Ulcerative colitis granulomas, as we discussed, is a mucin granulomas. So, as a result of the mucin extravasation, may have foreign body giant cells, may have eosinophils, but this is not always true. Usually, Crohn's granulomas giant cells are non-seen, and in tubercular granulomas, characteristic Langhans type of giant cells are expected. Mucin granulomas, bubbly and clear cytoplasm, phagocytosis of the mucin and crypt contents by the activated histiocytes. The Crohn's granulomas are pale eosinophilic, and as we are aware, tubercular granulomas, central caseous necrosis, Yersinia granulomas have a central neutrophil-rich infiltrate. Ulcerative colitis granulomas ill-defined, Crohn's granulomas also ill-defined, tubercular granulomas usually larger and well-defined. Ulcerative colitis, you see granulomas sparse, Crohn's granulomas are also sparse. Tubercular granulomas may be many granulomas, confluent granulomas, coalescing granulomas. So this is an ulcerative colitis granuloma. We can see a crypt is lost here, and we can see there is a neutrophil, there is an eosinophil rich. So on the other hand, a pale eosinophil granuloma of Crohn's disease, usually there are less or no eosinophils, and these are pericryptal microgranulomas of Crohn's. And needless to say, these are, so the comparison, ulcerative colitis. So Crohn's disease, very characterizing and catastrophic knife-like fission in ulcer. This is the term. Knife-like progress and transmural. They may extend through the bowel wall and develop into a fistula or resulting pericoronic abscess formation. Always supported me and gave me 1 or 2 photographs, and this is the Crohn's rosary with prominent germinal centers seen in Crohn's rosary. So dense lymphoid aggregates with or without germinal centers, transmural at the mucosal submucosal junction, lymphoid aggregates in subserosal adipose tissue characteristic, serosal beading pattern, the Crohn's rosary, superficial Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis like Crohn's disease, inflammatory changes are limited to the mucosa and superficial submucosa. So superficial Crohn's disease can also happen as a variation. Classic Crohn's disease in other segments of the bowel. So one may easily ask how a superficial Crohn's disease can be differentiated from ulcerative colitis. The other areas of the bowel will show classic Crohn's disease, and as discussed earlier, clinical, endoscopic, radiology all should collaborate to arrive at a diagnosis. Ulcerative colitis like Crohn's disease have a good success rate after pouch procedure with a superficial involvement. So from our undergraduate days, we are trying to read, memorize, and understand the difference between ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, and we are still doing that, and this will never end. So a recapitulation, maybe one or two newer thoughts. Diffuse continuous disease, as we know, segmental disease, rectal involvement, variable rectal involvement, or variable colonic involvement to be precise. Disease worse distally, variable disease severity, no fissures, sinus, fistula, everything, no transmural aggregates, transmural lymphoid aggregates, rosary, no ileal involvement except in backwash. There is ileal involvement, of course. Upper GI involvement less common, upper GI involvement common. Crypt rupture with mucin granulomas on the other hand. Epithelioid granulomas unrelated to ruptured crypts, rather microgranulomas. Longitudinal ulcers, transverse knife-like fissuring ulcers. Pyloric gland metaplasia less common. Pyloric gland metaplasia more common, and if happens, it is frequently in small bowel. And pyloric gland metaplasia, if it happens in colonic Crohn's, it happens in the right colon. So pyloric gland metaplasia more common in Crohn's and ANCA associated with left-sided colitis in Crohn's. So treated UC can be morphologically identical to treated or untreated Crohn's disease. Endoscopy together will help them arrive at the diagnosis. So indeterminate colitis. Indeterminate colitis is a term for the resection. So it is a term reserved for when the insufficient clinical, radiologic, endoscopic or pathologic data is available. It is a provisional term used on resected specimen. Why provisional term? In future, when further workup is done, either Crohn's or UC can be determined. And overlapping features between these two disorders, which occurs in fulminant colitis. So that is why in fulminant colitis, maybe emergency surgery, indeterminate colitis, the term may be used. It is not actually a specific disease entity, hence no specific diagnostic criteria. True nature of the underlying IBD becomes apparent on follow-up with available relevant patient information. So pathologic mimics of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, there are various mimics. So again, all kinds of correlation for clinical, endoscopy and radiology required. So I am coming on to very important and newer topics. One is pouchitis in IBD, which is actually may not be a very serious matter of concern for B pathologists, but it is a matter of serious concern for the clinicians. And since we gastrointestinal pathologists are very closely interacting with the clinicians, we have to understand their concern also. Pouchitis is a serious concern for the GI clinicians. So restorative proctocolectomy with ileal pouch anal anastomosis, IPAA. So it is a restorative surgery. We will see what it is. It is for the refractory colitis or dysplasia or cancer. So a restorative proctocolectomy is done with ileal pouch anal anastomosis. An ileal pouch is created with which is anastomosed to the anal canal. So pouchitis may develop in 70% of the patients after this procedure, which may impair the quality of life and which may demand a pouch excision surgery. And when pouchitis develops, interestingly, the features of pouchitis and the phenotype may resemble Crohn's disease, though the earlier disease was ulcerative colitis. Now in pouchitis, the disease may resemble Crohn's disease. So the pouch, it is here it is cut, and here it is cut, the colon out, and here this the terminal ileum is anastomosed with the staple, so ileal pouch anastomosis. So this is what exactly the pouchitis happens. So acute pouchitis and chronic pouchitis. When acute pouchitis happens, it is treated with medical management, antibiotic therapy. If it resolves, it's a nice story. If it does not resolve, it progresses to chronic pouchitis. And this chronic pouchitis can be antibiotic dependent, antibiotic refractory. So clinical features of pouchitis: increased bowel movement, frequency, urgency, abdominal cramps, pelvic discomfort, and concurrent immune-mediated conditions like PSC, seropositivity for IgG4 or P-ANCA, and infiltration of the IgG4 expressing cells in the pouch mucosa. So what exactly happens is, after the surgical procedure, if no symptoms, pouchoscopy can be done or can be deferred. If there are symptoms like stool frequency, rectal bleeding, urgency, as we discussed, in the pouchoscopy, what have to be determined is endoscopic inflammation, whether present, edema, granularity, friability. What is the endoscopic phenotype? It is looking like Crohn's or not. And what is the histological inflammation? Is it acute? Whether there is ulceration. So with this, there are certain differential diagnoses also which have to be ruled out, and at the same time the treatment is very important. Acute pouchitis, if it is resolved on antibiotics, nice. If it does not resolve, progressing to chronic pouchitis, antibiotics basic level tried, not responded, so then treated with 5-amino salicylic acid, steroids, anti-TNF drugs like infliximab, and the two newer drugs like vedolizumab and ustekinumab. So these are the human monoclonal antibodies: IgG1 against the integrin, and the ustekinumab is the interleukin against P40 subunit of the interleukin 12-23. Again, the IgG kappa monoclonal antibody. These newer monoclonal antibodies have been tried with some success. So coming to a topic very important, and lot of developments have happened and lot of updates have happened on this particular topic. It is dysplasia in inflammatory bowel disease. So a lot of change in the terminologies also have happened. So the earlier terminology of elevated type dysplasia, which was called dysplasia associated lesion or mass, it is not used now. This term has been eliminated. DALM term has been eliminated. So earlier, which was called DALM, it is now called visible dysplasia. So now let's concentrate on the newer terminologies. Dysplasia can be visible dysplasia, dysplasia can be invisible dysplasia. So how we determine visible and invisible? It is endoscopically visible dysplasia or endoscopically invisible dysplasia. This is actually very bad. We will discuss this. Endoscopically, the dysplasia is not visible, but the dysplasia is there. So the fire may be burning under the ashes. These kind of lesions have strong potential for future high-grade dysplasias and future carcinomas, and they harbor neoplastic signatures. We will discuss this, invisible dysplasia. So this is endoscopically invisible dysplasia. On the other hand, endoscopically visible dysplasia, non-polypoid dysplasia and polypoid dysplasia. So visible dysplasia may be polypoid, non-polypoid. Endoscopically visible dysplasia may be non-polypoid when it is less than 2.5 millimeter diameter. It can be elevated, it can be flat, it can be displaced. On the other hand, when it is polypoid or more than 2.5 millimeter, it can be sessile or it can be perambulated. So this is the endoscopically visible dysplasia. So this is a flat or mildly elevated lesion, which is non-polypoid, and this is a polypoid dysplasia, which is more than, of course, 2.5 millimeter size. So there are differences between regenerative low-grade dysplasia and high-grade dysplasia. So very careful, we will have to see mainly when the surface maturation, the nuclear stratification, and the mitosis. These are the parameters which we will have to concentrate. So this is the low grade dysplasia, this is the high grade dysplasia. We are seeing that it is not reaching up to the apex. The stratification here, it is reaching up to the apex, and marked loss of polarity is there. So dysplasia in inflammatory bowel disease in doubtful situations, sometimes Amaker alpha methyl coagulase has been shown to be sensitive and specific, but use because morphology ultimately gives the best visualization. P53 may be helpful but not always, and molecule help. And the intramucosal carcinoma, single or small infiltration, irregular angular configuration, deforming and pushing borders, and dysplasia indicates submucosal invasion. So dysplasia in IBD, newer concepts, newer inputs. Conventional, non-conventional. This is a new entity which has been discussed and described in the 2019s and 2020s, non-conventional dysplasia in IBD. So conventional dysplasia is what we already know, the adenomatous dysplasia, tubular adenoma-like dysplasia, or tubulovillous or villous adenoma-like dysplasia, which we are aware, cytological features of intestinal differentiation, similar to conventional colonic adenomas, which we are aware of. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium, elongated pencil-shaped overlapping nuclei, chromatin. On the other hand, the special type or the non-conventional dysplasias has been categorized into hypermucinous dysplasias, serrated dysplasias, crypt cell dysplasias, dysplasia with increased Paneth cell differentiation, and goblet cell in the 2019s and 2020s. So, conventional adenomatous dysplasia, we can see here low-grade dysplasia. So, the Vienna classification, non-invasive low-grade dysplasia and high-grade dysplasia. Indefinite for dysplasia when no distinction can be made between regenerative and low-grade dysplasias because of inflammation and certain technical reasons such as inadequate sampling or poor orientation. In that case, treatment of the infection, follow-up, and repeat biopsies can be advised. So again, these are the dysplastic foci of the adenomatous or the conventional dysplasia which we are aware, and this is high-grade dysplasia. The vesicular nuclei, the prominent nuclei up to the apex. So non-conventional dysplasias, the further reading, I will just recommend reading these new articles in this regard. So new articles have come up. Further reading recommended. Non-conventional dysplasia can be detected in approximately 33, so it is a fair number. 33% of the patients with IBD may have non-conventional dysplasias. Higher frequencies of advanced neoplasias, high-grade dysplasias, or colorectal cancer and aneuploidy in non-conventional dysplasias, in particular crypt cell dysplasias, hypermucinous dysplasias, and goblet cell deficient dysplasias. So higher malignant potential than conventional dysplasias or sporadic tubular adenomas. So need complete removal of the colon and careful follow-up, especially when the invisible dysplasia is there. It is really difficult. So greater than 40% of the non-conventional dysplasia is present as flat or invisible lesions, suggesting that IBD patients may benefit from random biopsy sampling in addition to targeted biopsies. So earlier it was thought that the targeted biopsies, where it is the visible dysplasias, is the area of interest. But even the random biopsy also is yielding areas of dysplasias which are the non-conventional dysplasias or which are harboring the neoplastic potential. So this is the hypermucinous type of dysplasia. Most common, it is the most common non-conventional subtype, tubulovillous of the villous pattern, prominent intracytoplasmic mucin, mild nuclear enlargement and hyperchromasia. It is so mild that it may not be called at all a dysplasia, but it has equivalent, if not more, neoplastic potential than the conventional dysplasias. Degree of atypia increases from tips to the base. So as we move towards the base, degree of atypia increases. It has twice the frequency of KRAS mutations compared to conventional type hybrid dysplasias, indicating advanced neoplasia and high rate of aneuploidy. Serrated dysplasia. So these are serrated dysplasia. So share similar morphological features with the sporadic counterparts, the sawtooth or the stillet architecture in greater than 50% of the lesions. Serrated dysplasia can be polypoid, can be non-polypoid. When polypoid, sessile serrated lesion-like, traditional serrated adenoma-like, or serrated dysplasia not otherwise specified. These are the polypoid variants. May coexist with conventional dysplasia or other types of non-conventional dysplasias. So actually, these kind of it is some increased awareness is actually required to detect them and caution the clinician about the neoplastic potential. And non-polypoid dysplasia, they are detected on random, non-targeted biopsies, and they are termed IBD associated serrated epithelial lesion. So serrated epithelial change, hyperplastic like mucosal change, or flat serrated change. So serrated epithelial change for the non-polypoid type of dysplasia. They have a BRAF, P63, P53, beta-catenin mutations, and more in the left colon and rectum. So serrated epithelial change, from this article the photographs are, so we can see that the nodular mucosa over here, and here the serrated epithelial change. This is invisible, and the clip cell dysplasia is a flat, non-crowded tubular pattern to the, and mild nuclear enlargement, hyperchromasia, and irregularity is there. Concurrent history of primary sclerosing cholangitis may be there, more in the left colon with aneuploidy and P53 overexpression. Dysplasia with increased Paneth cell differentiation is yet another variant of non-conventional dysplasia. They may be tubular lesions lined by enlarged hyperchromatic pencillate nuclei with increased Paneth cell. So increased Paneth cell may be found in other conventional and non-conventional dysplasia also. So when to call it this dysplasia with increased Paneth cell differentiation, when to call it this subtype? It is at least two contiguous crypts in two different foci beyond what is present in the background mucosa. This is the criteria which has been laid. So at least two contiguous crypts in two different mucosa. Paneth cells can be present in other forms of conventional and non-conventional dysplasia. To designate it in under this category, this criteria should be required, and the number of goblet cells may be reduced. Number of goblet cells may be reduced, and these are the Paneth cells. Number of goblet cells may be reduced in goblet cell deficient dysplasia. Also of that Paneth cell, at least two contiguous crypts in two different foci beyond what it is in the normal mucosa. If that criteria is not there, then it is goblet cell deficient dysplasia. So tubular lesions lined by complete absence of goblet cells, often leading to an eosinophilic cytoplasm. Scattered Paneth cells may be seen, so that criteria must be achieved. On the other hand, in the Paneth cell rich dysplasia with increased Paneth cell differentiation, there also the goblet cell deficiency can be there, but this criteria needs to be achieved. So finally, the treatment for the dysplasia, non-inflamed mucosa, inflamed mucosa. If it is a non-inflamed mucosa, we are seeing a sporadic adenoma, polypectomy done. Associated dysplasia is present. If visible dysplasia is present, or if invisible dysplasia is present. Kindly note, if invisible dysplasia is present, they are recommending proctocolectomy. So this is very seriously taken. If invisible dysplasia is present, that means dysplasia may be present anywhere and everywhere. So a proctocolectomy has been recommended. On the other hand, if visible dysplasia is there, if it is a polypoid dysplasia or a non-polypoid dysplasia. After polypoid dysplasia, polypectomy is done, non-polypoid dysplasia, endoscopic resection, ultimately the removal of the dysplastic zone. After removal of the dysplastic zone, biopsy surrounding mucosa is having dysplasia or not. If the biopsy of the surrounding mucosa is having dysplasia, it goes into the same category of invisible dysplasia and proctocolectomy. If the biopsy is not surrounding mucosa is not having dysplasia, so it goes into the follow-up. So this is probably my last slide, and thanks for the kind attention, I must say. So I don't know whether I could finish in time. So thanks for the kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushik. Excellent presentation. There is no time here. You can continue. There is no issues about time, but then you have kept the time and you have finished on time. A wonderful presentation, and the best part of it is right up to the latest development in inflammatory bowel disease has been addressed. Wonderful. You have really worked hard.
Thank you so much.
This
Thank you
is
so much,
definitely
sir.
going to be a very important, you can say, lecture for all the postgraduates, people who are appearing for FRC path, because these conventional, non-conventional dysplasias and various types of new dysplasias, serrated dysplasias, these are not available in any of the textbooks. They are all now as articles just recently published, and some of them have not even been published properly yet. So
Yes, exactly.
you have brought in the latest aspects of inflammatory bowel disease, and you have handled the entire such a vast subject in a very nice way. Touching upon all the relevant points which are very important. Wonderfully done, excellently done. In fact, God bless you. Very well done. Thank you so much. Right. If there are any questions on the YouTube, I will put it up to you on your WhatsApp thing. You can answer them there. Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kaushik Majumdar. Excellently presented. Very well done.
Yeah. I shall love to answer any questions, and thank you so much, Dr. Nadeem sir, for giving this opportunity.
Always pleasure is mine. Thank you. Take care. Good night. Bye bye.
Bye bye.